Hello everybody, welcome back to Baking Soda Central, the place where we research and we think about baking soda, especially as it pertains to us today in COVID-19. Last time we were talking about the Spanish flu and how there were oodles of directives back then which included taking baking soda either as a gargle or as a dosing daily, once daily or more, frequently if you were actually ill. What happened since that time with the story of baking soda? Well, in 1922, Arm & Hammer put out a new little pamphlet. They were used to putting these out and sending them to millions of homes, and this one said for flus and colds. They talked about it before, but now they kind of made a declaration, and this was followed by them setting up a Department of Health. They sent out more pamphlets for decades telling people about the medicinal benefits, and now they call themselves a proven medicinal agent based on their stellar performance during the Spanish flu and subsequent good ratings. Now, this went on such that decades later, in the 1947, baking soda is considered the most useful, most used medication or drug in North America. But in 1960, the FDA changed its description of a drug, and it said that sodium bicarbonate could not be called a drug, and therefore they made them take off their label, and therefore it was no good for doing what it had been doing all these years, apparently. Now, a good story doesn't die hard. So baking soda went on, bicarbonate soda went on to become more and more useful in many domains around our world. But the story about it being useful for colds and flus and managing a pandemic kind of became folklore. However, at the beginning of COVID-19, a story popped up on Facebook, among many, but one in particular said that hot tea of lemon and baking soda could prevent you from getting the disease. Now, you would think that medical people, researchers would go, pH, got a history, better check into that. That is not what happened. The opposite happened. The fact checkers trashed it. ResearchGate, JPost, Snoop Snopes, the Journal, Reuters, Euronews, the Logical Indian, Africa Check, all said that there was no evidence. And people believe fact checkers. So that put a pretty big damper on that thing that could have had a huge impact right at the beginning of this situation. What did they use as background? Well, most of them didn't do any research at all. Some did. There were a few slightly odd things about this story. They focused on that. But most of them either used irrelevant data, but moreover, they referred to, up the ladder, to WHO. World Health Organization said there is no evidence that bicarbonate of soda can prevent a viral infection or this particular coronavirus. Now let's think about what they mean by no evidence. No evidence goes in contradiction to historical evidence, which we have been looking at, but there's a significant amount of it from back then. It means that you have to have a very specific kind of trial. In their view, if it hasn't been through this trial, then there's nothing to it. And trial is a gold standard trial. And what it means is that you have a lot of random people, and you give some of them the thing you're interested in, and some of them, the other group, they don't get it. And nobody knows who's doing it, neither the people taking it or the researchers, so that the data becomes unbiased. And then you gather the data at the end of that, and then that becomes the basis of your evidence. The problem with this is that the gold standard is costly. It can be costly in lives, and it can be costly to implement, because you've got to have a trial, you've got to follow the data, lots of people involved, and if you are advocating for a non-expensive item, what is the payback on it? So it kind of guarantees that expensive items, things that are cost more, are the things that are going to be analyzed and put through the trial. In terms of a natural trial where you have the yes people and the no people, if they really want to run one of those, in 1920, there was a trial done, and it was done on the provocation of three doctors, Dr. Eli, Madison, and Davidson, who were all promoters of using alkalis, bicarbonate of soda, potassium, calcium, as treatments for the influenza, primarily the bicarbonate of soda, And they were seeing radical improvements, very consistent results with their patients using this. And they said, put it to trial because we need the trials. So in 1920, unfortunately or fortunately, a third wave went through around the world, through the United States, and the University of Cincinnati ended up, their hospital, with a lot of sick people. So they did the trial on them. They kept all their stats. And they had half of the people that they were treating with alkalized bicarbonate of soda primarily, and half of the people that they weren't. And they were taking notes. So they were going, for that bunch. And then this bunch, they were going, oh, it's good. And then they had their data at the end. But what I'm wondering is whether the widows of the people who were on the placebo, whether they got compensation for that. But if who wants a trial, they can have it from 1920. They can go back to Haken and Isaacs, and that's a trial from back then. Now, when they say that there is no evidence, that's a bit like saying this is, there's no evidence, this is a banana. Some people say this is a banana. There's no evidence this is a banana. Inside here. Well, we have to have a trial to prove that. Like, we would have to have 50 chimpanzees, and 150 would open it up and check it out, and 50 wouldn't, and they would eat it and they wouldn't. And then at the end of that, we would have the evidence and the trial, and we could tell you something. Oh, actually, there are. It does say there, banana, Dole, Costa Rica. So there is a bit of evidence, but don't worry about that. Right. So my question is, that story came out about the lemon and the bicarbonate last March. That was last winter. So a year's gone by, and we could ask, where's the trial? Like, we know that WHO has to dedicate 50% of their money to vaccines, and they have less money for clean water and good agricultural practices and things like that. But maybe they just have a little bit of money for something like this, because then the people of the world could help themselves. So a year later, where's the trial?